Everyone in that courtroom thought they'd seen chaos before, but nothing could prepare them for what Karen did next. With shaking hands, mascara smudged from frustrated tears, she spun toward Judge Judy and screamed, "You manipulated my relationship. You broke us up. You ruined my life." Gasps shot across the room like electricity. Phones lifted, whispers exploded, and even the bailiff froze mid-step. This wasn't just a complaint. This was a full-scale accusation against the one judge everyone believed was untouchable. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. And for the first time in a long time, Judge Judy didn't fire back. She didn't slam the gavel. She didn't even speak. She just sat there, stoic, silent, eyes fixed on Karen like she was searching deeper than the words, deeper than the rage, straight into the fear hiding underneath it. Because there was fear. Karen wasn't crying over love. She was crying over control slipping through her fingers. But in that moment, with the court buzzing and all eyes burning into her, Karen really thought she had the upper hand. Really believed she could turn the internet against Judge Judy and make herself the victim. And then, almost too calmly, Karen's ex stood up. No shaking, no yelling, no panic. Just quiet confidence as he reached into his pocket, unlocked his phone and held it tight like it was a truth the world wasn't ready to see. No one knew yet, but that phone held the receipts. The kind of proof that doesn't just end an argument, it exposes a person's true character. Everyone thought Judge Judy was cornered. Everyone thought Karen had the power. But they had no idea what was coming. Because love doesn't fall apart by accident, and the person who screams the loudest is often the one hiding the most. And in a few seconds, this courtroom and everyone watching would see exactly who Karen really was. If you love watching the truth quietly destroy a lie, and seeing the loudest person in the room fall the hardest, then stay right here and make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next will make your jaw drop. The courtroom air thickened as Karen's breathing steadied just enough for her to speak again. Her fury didn't fade. It shifted, turning into that trembling, righteous tone people use when they're absolutely convinced they are the hero of their own tragedy. She lifted her chin, eyes darting from Judy to the audience like she needed witnesses for her pain. "You don't understand," she declared, voice cracking with both anger and desperation. "I loved him. I saved him. If I hadn't stepped in, if I hadn't fought for our future, he would have wasted his life surrounded by people who never cared. I was doing everything for us when she—" Her finger snapped back toward Judge Judy. "Made him believe I was the problem." A few sympathetic murmurs fluttered through the room. Not many, but enough to feed her confidence. Enough to make her believe there were still hearts she could sway. Karen latched onto that energy like it was oxygen. "He didn't know what he needed," she insisted, voice climbing again. I guided him. I protected him from people who wanted to poison his mind, who wanted to tear us apart. And then she spat the word like poison, told him boundaries were normal. That independence was healthy. As if wanting commitment makes me a villain. Her tone sharpened, eyes wild for validation. Is it wrong to want loyalty? To want a partner who focuses on us instead of running around with friends who never liked me? I wasn't controlling, I was committed. A hush fell. People weren't nodding now. They were watching, uncertain, eyebrows furrowed. Her argument didn't feel like love. It sounded like someone trying to justify trapping a bird and calling it protection. Judge Judy hadn't moved. Still that same stillness, that same unreadable calm, and that bothered Karen more than any insult could have. "Say something," she snapped suddenly. "You sit there and stare like you're above everyone. I came here for fairness and I'm being humiliated." But still, Judy didn't react. That silence was louder than any gavel. Karen's breath shook. "I sacrificed everything for him. I planned our future, I pushed him to improve himself, and all he did was fight me. He blamed me because you made him think I was controlling. You twisted his mind. You made him block me out emotionally first and then physically. You made him leave me." The irony that she blamed Judy for him blocking her didn't even cross her mind. Not yet. The ex behind her slowly exhaled, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight. He had heard all of this before. The court was hearing it for the first time, but he had lived in those walls she built around him. He knew this speech by heart. Karen pressed on, pacing like she was giving a speech written in heartbreak ink and ego fire. "Do you know how painful it is when your partner stops needing you?" she shouted. "When he stops answering your calls, stops telling you where he is, when he decides other people matter more suddenly? One day you're the center of his life, and the next, the world takes him from you." There it was. Not love, possession. Something in the room shifted. People weren't leaning toward her anymore. They were leaning away. Even she could feel the pull change direction, but she couldn't stop talking. She was spiraling and didn't even realize it. He didn't know how to choose right for himself, she continued, as if she were revealing a universal truth. I guided him. That's not abuse. That's devotion. I know him better than he knows himself, murmurs. A quiet ripple of discomfort rolled through the seats. Even the bailiff's jaw ticked. Judy's eyes narrowed, just barely. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. The kind judges and psychologists and parents develop. The look that says, I've seen this pattern before. Karen wasn't fighting for love. She was fighting for control she never truly had. Still, Judge Judy stayed silent. She let Karen's own words dig the hole deeper. Karen's voice wavered as she sensed her grip slipping. I just wanted him to focus on me. On us, that's what love means. You don't need 50 friends when you have your person. A gentle cough from someone in the gallery. A whispered yikes. Karen's lip twitched. You're all judging me, she hissed. But you don't know what it's like to love someone who doesn't understand loyalty. Who doesn't know how to shut the world out and just choose you. The ex finally lifted his head. Pain flickered across his face, and not anger. Relief that he wasn't alone in this anymore. That perhaps someone would finally see what he endured quietly for so long. Karen took a shaky breath. He left me because she convinced him I was the problem. She jabbed her finger at Judy again. She broke us. That's when Judge Judy finally blinked, slow, deliberate, like waking from a meditation. She leaned slightly forward, not much, just enough to show she was alive under that still exterior. And Karen froze. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's power waiting to strike. Because sometimes the smallest movement carries the biggest warning. Karen swallowed. For the first time, her confidence wavered. It wasn't over yet, but the cracks in her defense had begun. And everyone in that courtroom could see it. Even her. Because deep down, Karen knew something terrifying. If the truth came out today, she wouldn't lose her relationship. She would lose her narrative. And once a person who lives in control loses control, they have nothing left to scream behind. For a long second, no one moved. The courtroom held its breath, waiting to see which direction this fragile, breaking narrative would fall. Karen's anger trembled in the air like a fire starved for oxygen. But the flames were already dying. And right there, in the quiet that followed her last accusation, another voice stepped into the center of the room. Soft, steady, unshaken. Her ex finally rose. He didn't slam his chair. He didn't glare. He didn't posture like someone trying to win. He just stood, with the silence and heartbreak of someone who had already lived this battle long before today. I never left you because of Judge Judy, he said, voice steady yet weighted by exhaustion. I left you because I couldn't breathe. The room shifted, an emotional tilt. Karen blinked hard, stunned by the simplicity of it. That's the thing about honesty. It doesn't need to be loud to be devastating. He looked down briefly, like revisiting memories in real time. When we met, I thought your intensity meant passion. I thought your jealousy meant care. I thought your rules were boundaries. I thought... He paused, voice tightening. I thought your world needed protecting. I didn't realize it needed controlling. A hush. A subtle inhale from the gallery. Karen's jaw dropped. That's not true, she stammered. I didn't control you. He lifted a hand gently. Not aggressive. Just truth-stopping noise. You asked why I stopped talking to people, why I stopped going out, why I changed my routine. He shook his head. You didn't ask. You told. Karen's face twisted. I supported you. I kept you focused. He let out a small, almost sad smile. You kept me isolated. The weight of that word hit her harder than any shout could have. He continued softly. You didn't love me. You owned me. Every friend I spoke to, you called a distraction. Every woman I greeted, you called a threat. You said love meant loyalty. His eyes lifted to hers, sincere and gentle. But what you meant was love meant obedience. Karen's breathing quickened, panic surfacing under fury. You're twisting. No, he whispered, shaking his head. I'm remembering. That line floated in the air like a verdict. He turned to Judy, respectful, grounded. Your Honor, I came here hoping we could just end things quietly. But she blames you for losing something she never tried to build, only control. He looked back at Karen, not with anger, but with something worse. Empathy for the pain she caused herself. You didn't lose me because someone manipulated me, he said softly. You lost me because you never let me be a person. Karen's body shook. Her pride crumbled in real time. And I didn't block you because someone told me to. He nodded at his pocket, where the phone with the block list rested, waiting. I blocked you because after everything I gave, I realized I had given up me. The court sat in heavy, respectful silence. If love is a cage, he finished. Then leaving wasn't betrayal, it was freedom. Karen's face flushed red, not with power now, but fear. Because her script, her story, her carefully crafted victimhood, it was collapsing, and she couldn't scream over it anymore. And still, Judge Judy hadn't spoken. She didn't have to, because sometimes the truth doesn't need a gavel. It just needs space to breathe. Karen whispered, voice breaking. You're making me look like a monster. He shook his head gently. Karen, you're making yourself look like someone who didn't understand love. And that line, quiet, almost tender, cut deeper than any anger could have. Then he stepped back, sat down, and folded his hands. No gloating, no victory smile, just relief. A person who finally walked out of a cage only to realize it had no locks, just walls built from guilt and fear. Judge Judy shifted slightly, a subtle breath, a micro nod, as though silently acknowledging truth spoken without theatrics. Because the underdog doesn't roar. Sometimes the underdog just waits and lets truth fight its own battle. And Karen, for the first time, she wasn't the heroine in her mind. She was the story she never wanted to be, a story about control mistaken for love, and loss mistaken for betrayal. Her eyes darted around the room, searching and for sympathy, for allies, for validation that wasn't coming, because the truth had entered the room, and truth does not negotiate. Karen stared at him as if she didn't recognize the man sitting across from her. The room had shifted. You could feel it in the air, like a storm cloud losing its shape the moment sunlight forces its way through. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Not because she lacked words, but because words were no longer weapons in this room. They were mirrors, and she could suddenly see herself in them. That's not fair, she blurted, voice wobbling between anger and panic. You're twisting everything. You always twist everything. I was fighting for us. I was the only one who cared enough. He didn't look at her this time. He didn't nod, didn't shake his head. His stillness told the truth without speaking. Karen's chest rose and fell fast. You abandoned me. You made me feel invisible, and now you're trying to make me look crazy in front of the whole world. She spun toward the courtroom like she expected applause or sympathy, or at least a nod from someone, anyone. But silence greeted her. A silence thicker than judgment. A silence full of realization. Even the people who walked in ready to pity her were now watching with uneasy distance. She tried again, louder this time. Do you all think I'm insane? You think I'm the villain? I loved him. I loved him more than anyone else ever could. The words cracked, raw and frantic. Not strong anymore, but desperate. You can't punish someone for loving too hard. You can't. Judy didn't move. Didn't tilt her head. Didn't blink. Karen's breath stuttered. Say something, she begged, eyes burning into Judge Judy's stillness. You're just going to sit there and let him lie? Aren't you supposed to stand for justice? Aren't you supposed to see through manipulation? A beat, another. Then Judy did the smallest, most devastating thing she could have done. She raised one brow. That tiny motion crushed Karen more than 1,000 shouted rebuttals, because this wasn't Judy being defeated. This was Judy watching someone self-destruct without needing to lift a finger. Karen's face flushed crimson. You think you're better than me, she whispered, shaking her head. All of you. You think I'm dramatic, unhinged, when really I was just trying. Those last two words landed quieter, softer, as though her voice finally ran out of ammunition. Then, without warning, she turned back to her ex, voice trembling instead of roaring. Why couldn't you just choose me? Why wasn't I enough? It wasn't anger now. It wasn't spite. It was the hollow echo of someone who built her identity in another person and watched it collapse when they walked away. He looked at her then, and his eyes weren't cold. They were sad, honest sadness for what love could have been if it hadn't been suffocated. You were enough, he said gently. You just didn't believe you were unless you controlled everything around you. That line landed like truth dropped in still water, rippling until it touched every corner of the room. Karen's knees weakened, and she gripped the witness rail like it might keep her standing. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. And I didn't mean to lose you, he answered, softly, two broken truths floating between them. Not accusations, but admissions of a love that never learned how to breathe. A murmur stirred in the crowd, because heartbreak, even when self-inflicted, still hurts to see. Karen swallowed, tried to gather strength, but it was too late to rebuild the mask she wore coming in. I didn't want to be left behind. The room exhaled, a collective soft ache. Everyone knows that fear. She wiped her cheek fast as if tears were betrayal too. Then, in a small, nearly cracking voice, "I just didn't want to be alone." Judge Judy finally moved. She leaned forward, not aggressively, not triumphantly, but with the gravity of a truth-keeper who had seen this story too many times to be surprised by it. Her voice had not yet spoken, but her silence held a lesson. Sometimes the biggest punishment is simply letting someone hear themselves. Karen looked around the room again and saw no villains. Just faces staring not to judge but because the truth had unfolded whether she wanted it to or not. The mask was gone, the excuses exhausted, the righteous fire extinguished by its own smoke. And in this rare, raw moment, she was not the accuser or the abandoned, or even the victim. She was just human, unpainfully human, facing the wreckage she never thought she caused. And Judy? Still quiet, still patient, the underdog not by weakness but by discipline, letting the truth walk on its own feet, without ever raising her voice. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all, and let their reality speak for them. A stillness sat over the courtroom like dust in a sunbeam. Fragile, floating, alive. Karen's shoulders trembled as she struggled to pull breath back into her lungs, like she was trying to rebuild pride out of pieces that no longer fit together. And then, the sound, a soft click, a phone unlocking, every head turned. Her ex gently lifted his phone, not triumphantly, not aggressively, but like a man holding a quiet truth he never wanted to have to show. His thumb hovered for a moment, a flash of hesitation, not because he feared being wrong, but because he once loved the person he was about to expose. Then slowly, he turned the screen toward the court. Rows and rows of names, scrolling, 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 all under one category, blocked. A gasp rolled across the room like a wave hitting a shore. A reporter in the back whispered, "Oh my God." A woman in the front instinctively covered her mouth. Karen's breath hitched. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you're doing this to embarrass me." He didn't argue. He didn't gloat. He simply held the phone steady in the air, letting truth sit unapologetically in plain sight. "This," he said softly, "is everybody I was forced to cut out of my life." The gallery leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts pounding in collective disbelief. "My co-workers, my old classmates, childhood friends," he swallowed hard. "Women I barely knew, women I never met, my sister, and eventually," his voice caught, a soft crack revealing just how deep the wound once ran, "my mother." The silence after that wasn't silence at all. It was shock, heartbreak, recognition, all tangled together. Karen snapped upright, panic igniting again. "I didn't force you. I cared about you. I protected us. Those people were toxic. They didn't want us happy. They were jealous, or they simply existed," he replied gently, lowering the phone. "Not everyone in my life was a threat, Karen, but to you, any person with a heartbeat and a voice was competition." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't soft or sad. They were burning, boiling tears of a person watching control slip into cardboard ash. "That's not love," Judy finally said. Calm, steady, no raised tone, just gravity delivered in words. Karen flinched like the sentence had weight. Because it did, Judy didn't stop. "That's possession, and possession masquerading as loyalty isn't devotion," she continued. "It's fear in disguise, and fear is not partnership." Karen tried to speak, but her voice came out small, strangled. "I just didn't want to lose him." "And in trying not to lose him," Judy replied, eyes sharp with truth, "you made it impossible for him to stay." Her ex nodded, a gentle acknowledgement of a heartbreak that had already happened long before today. "The blocking wasn't about love," he said softly. "It was about control. You said loyalty meant cutting people off, but loyalty isn't isolation. Love isn't measured by who you eliminate. It's measured by who you grow with." The courtroom hummed with a quiet ache, the kind that comes when someone speaks a truth too many people recognize too deeply. Karen's face crumpled. Not in rage now, in fear, in realization. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered again, voice cracking into childlike confusion. "I was just scared." "And I understand that," he answered. "Truly I do. But love built on fear becomes a prison built by trembling hands." That line settled in the room like dust after a collapse. Judy leaned back, not smug, not victorious, but steady. Still the underdog, yet somehow effortlessly, undeniably in control. "People don't leave because they stop caring," Judy said quietly. "Sometimes they leave because caring alone is not enough to breathe." Karen's hand hung in the air, empty, as if she was reaching for the version of herself she always believed she was, the one she saw in her own narrative. but could no longer touch. The room didn't judge. It simply saw the truth had spoken, soft, brutal, undeniable, and Karen stood alone in it. Her eyes darted to the phone again, to all those names she once celebrated removing, believing each block was proof of loyalty, not proof of loss. You call it love, Judy concluded, voice firm and final. But love never demands the world shrink until only one exists. And just like that, the illusion fell apart. Not with shouting, not with force, but with evidence and a quiet willingness to let the truth stand on its own 2 feet. If you've ever seen someone confuse control for love, or watched truth stand taller than manipulation, stay with me. This story isn't done yet. Hit subscribe if you believe some truths don't need to scream. They just need to be shown. For a long moment, Judge Judy didn't speak. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because sometimes the truth needs room to settle. It needs to breathe. And in that courtroom, the air itself felt heavy with realization. Karen stood trembling. Her emotional armor cracked, her voice lost somewhere between shame and panic. Her ex sat quietly, the calm after a storm. Then Judy finally leaned forward, hands steepled, voice piercing in its softness. You know what's interesting? She said slowly. When people feel small inside, they often try to make someone else smaller to feel safe. Karen swallowed hard. Control doesn't start as control, Judy continued. It starts as fear. Fear of being replaced. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being forgotten. A murmur rippled in the audience. Heads nodded unconsciously. Uncomfortable truths hitting something universal. Most people who become controlling, Judy said, don't wake up planning to suffocate someone. They wake up terrified of losing them. Karen blinked, stunned, because for the first time the judge wasn't cutting her down. She was seeing her, and being seen is sometimes more painful than being accused. But fear, Judy continued, has a sneaky way of disguising itself as love, and that's when people stop holding on to someone's heart and start holding on to their freedom. Karen's breathing hitched. Judy's tone sharpened just slightly. Blocking 40 people, friends, coworkers, family, that doesn't protect a relationship. It isolates it. It traps it. And when you cage someone, they don't become loyal. She paused, voice low, razor steady. They become desperate to escape. Karen's lips trembled. The ex lowered his gaze, remembering the years he spent quietly shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. You didn't lose him because of someone else's influence, Judy said. You lost him because you didn't trust that love could survive without walls. That line landed with a weight that nobody in that room could ignore. Karen stared at the ground. Her voice came out tiny, no anger left, only exhaustion. I just didn't want to be abandoned again, she whispered. Judy softened. Not in weakness, but in empathy. The tragedy, she replied quietly, is that in trying to prevent abandonment, you created the very conditions that caused it. Karen squeezed her fists, tears welling again, but not furious ones. Human ones, honest ones. Pain doesn't excuse control, Judy continued, but pain explains it, and understanding is how people grow, if they choose to. The audience watched, mesmerized. This wasn't humiliation. It was awakening. Judy turned to the ex. And you? He straightened instinctively, almost surprised to be addressed. You didn't leave because you stopped loving, she said. You left because love can't breathe when someone is drowning in their own fear. His eyes glistened. Relief, validation, sorrow. You did the right thing walking away, Judy added. Not just for yourself, for her too. Otherwise she'd still be convinced suffocation is affection. Karen's breath caught, and that truth, that brutal, freeing truth, shook her in a way rage never could. A tear slipped before she could hide it. Then another. Vulnerability replaced defiance, and for the first time, she looked less like someone fighting to win and more like someone trying to understand. Judy continued, voice warm but unyielding. Love isn't about shutting doors. Love is about opening them and trusting the person won't walk out. If you have to lock someone in to keep them, you don't have love. You have fear wearing a mask. Karen let out a sound, half sob, half exhale. Like someone finally letting go of a weight they didn't know they were carrying. And as for blaming me, Judy added, lifting one brow. Darling, I don't control men. Trust me, if I did, the world would be a calmer place. A ripple of laughter released the tension in the room. Even Karen cracked the tiniest broken smile through her tears. Judy's voice softened again. Quiet but overwhelmingly powerful. Relationships don't fail because someone told the truth. They fail because someone was too afraid to. Then she leaned back. Verdict delivered not in punishment but clarity. You don't need to be punished today, she said gently. You already lived your punishment. Karen blinked. You lived inside fear instead of love. And that is a prison far worse than any judgment I can hand down. She paused. Final lesson loading like a gavel made of wisdom, not wood. Let him go. Not because you lost, but because holding him isn't how you find yourself. Karen lowered her head. Not defeated, humbled. A woman who finally understood the battle she thought she'd been fighting was never with him, but with the parts of herself she never learned to trust. And next time, Judy said softly, don't love someone because you're afraid of being alone. Love them because you love yourself first. Silence followed. The kind of silence that signals truth has rooted itself deep. Karen nodded slowly. Thank you, she whispered, not to be polite, but because she meant it. Because the truth, painful as it was, felt cleaner than the lie she'd been living in. Her ex wiped at his eye. The courtroom, silent, moved, Otto breathed again. And through it all, Judy didn't smirk. Didn't gloat. Didn't celebrate a win. She remained what she always is. The quiet force that waits, watches, and lets truth do the work. The courtroom was no longer a battlefield. It felt like what storms feel like after they pass, still charged with the electricity of what happened, but softened by relief, by clarity, by the undeniable stillness that follows truth. Karen stood there, shoulders loose now, not in defeat, but in surrender, not the kind that breaks you, but the kind that rebuilds you. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes, once blazing with accusation, were quiet now, heavy but aware, like the fight had finally fallen out of her, and in its place, a humbled honesty. Her ex sat quietly, hands resting together. He wasn't smiling. This wasn't a moment of triumph for him. It wasn't victory. It wasn't "I told you so." It was closure, slow, unexpected, and bittersweet. Judge Judy studied Karen's face one last time, like she was confirming something, like she wanted to see if Karen's posture, her eyes, her spirit reflected the words that had been spoken. When she saw what she needed to see, not perfection, not repentance forced by fear, but the faint spark of realization. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. Court is adjourned, she said, voice steady, controlled, almost gentle. The gavel came down, not like thunder but like a final heartbeat, a closing breath to a lesson that didn't need punishment, only truth. Karen didn't move at first. Her fingers traced the edge of the table as though she needed something solid to touch, something real to hold, while the ground beneath her shifted into unfamiliar territory. Her ex stood, not rushing out, not running away, just rising like someone who had waited a long time for this moment, not to see someone else fall but to finally feel free enough to stand up fully. He turned to her, and for a moment time held them both in the same space again. The love they had, the pain they shared, the years in between that shaped them and cracked them. Karen met his eyes. Her voice was barely audible when it came. I really thought I was protecting us. He nodded, not dismissing her, not excusing, but acknowledging the truth inside her words. I know, he said softly, and maybe that's why I stayed longer than I should have, because I believed in your intentions, that even when I was drowning in them. She winced at that, not from offense, but from recognition. The truth didn't stab anymore. It settled. Heavy, real, but necessary. I didn't know how to love without holding on too tight, she admitted. He looked at her with a sadness that wasn't pity, just memory. Maybe one day you will, Karen breathed, shaky and raw. I hope so. He nodded again and then he walked away. Not coldly, not hurried, just forward. The way healing always begins, one quiet step at a time, without applause. People watched him leave. Then they looked at Karen, who stayed standing a moment longer as if deciding who she was now without the fight to define her. Eventually she exhaled, a long, shaky breath, and she walked too. Not toward him, not toward anyone, just toward herself. The spectators filed out slowly, whispering, not with gossip but with thought. They came for entertainment, and left with something heavier than drama, lighter than judgment, something that looked suspiciously like empathy. Once they were nearly gone, a young woman who sat near the back approached Karen hesitantly, voice soft. Hey, I used to be like that too, she murmured. Thinking love meant someone never needing anyone else. I learned the hard way too. Karen blinked in surprise, grateful in a way she couldn't express. She nodded. A quiet thank you caught somewhere between humility and exhaustion. And then she stepped into the hallway, not triumphant, not broken, just human. Just someone beginning at zero again. Inside the courtroom, the quiet settled. Papers lay still. Chairs were empty. Light filtered through the high windows like forgiveness. Only Judge Judy remained for a moment, gathering her notes. The bailiff approached, leaning slightly. You handled that differently today. Judy glanced at him, one brow raised. Not every battle needs a hammer, she answered. Sometimes all you need is a mirror. The bailiff chuckled softly. They don't always like what they see. No, she agreed, almost wistful. But if they see it, they have a chance to change. She paused, then added, dry as ever, but warm in its truth. And let's be honest, occasionally the mirror hurts less than the hammer. He smiled, shook his head and opened the door for her. Judy walked out, not to applause, not to fanfare, but with the same measured grace she always had, underdog in silence. Power in patience. Victory not in crushing someone, but in letting the truth lift itself. That's the thing about Judge Judy. She doesn't win by force. She wins by clarity, and clarity is the kind of power no one can scream over. Later, outside the courthouse, Karen stood alone on the steps, arms wrapped around herself, not from cold, but from the unfamiliar quiet inside her. For the first time in a long time, no voice filled her head. There was no argument to win, no enemy to defeat, only questions she had avoided for years, now echoing gently instead of roaring. Her ex walked past at a distance. He didn't look away, and neither did she. There was no hatred. Just two lessons walking in separate directions, wiser, freer, changed. A breeze brushed past them, a quiet reminder that life keeps moving, even when hearts pause. Karen whispered to the wind, next time, I'll love better. And somewhere in that whisper a seed of truth planted, not for a relationship, for herself. In a city full of noise, chaos, judgment, and ego, one courtroom learned something powerful that day. Not all villains know they're villains. Not all victims stay broken. And sometimes the loudest person in the room is just the most afraid. Love isn't earned by possession. Trust isn't built by isolation. And strength isn't measured by control, but by the courage to let someone be free. If you believe real love never cages and real truth doesn't need to scream, then stick with us. There are more stories like this, stories of ego, truth, heartbreak, and redemption. Stories where control crumbles and honesty rises. Stories where Judge Judy doesn't have to roar to be right. She just lets life reveal itself. Subscribe, because sometimes the quietest justice hits the hardest, and in this courtroom, truth always finds its way home.